Hey, welcome back to A Shark's Perspective. So, a lot of people today are focused on growing their number of followers, but most aren't looking at the science behind it. Most are just spilling out a ton of content in a very cluttered and noisy world. So, do you need to be a celebrity of sorts or a typical influencer to really grow your following to 1 million followers? Or can you just be a regular Joe or Jane? 1 million followers is crazy in itself. That's basically the population in the city limits of San Jose. But what if you kept growing that to, say, 2.5 million, which is basically the population in the city limits of Houston? So, how do you do it? Brendan Kane is the best selling author of 1 Million Followers, and he's an innovation strategist who empowers brands to scale, expand, and accelerate their business and influence. And on this episode, we'll discuss growth hacks for how he built a massive social following in just 30 days, influencers and influence, helping celebrities like Taylor Swift, Rihanna, and Katie Couric grow their followings, keep those followers engaged with content, video, and a lot more. So let's tune into a social media thought leader with a shark with just a few less followers on this episode of A Shark's Perspective. Brendan, thank you so much for joining us today on A Shark's Perspective. If you would, tell us a little bit about your career to date. How does a guy from Chicago Film School turn into a best-selling author, digital marketer, and social media expert living in Beverly Hills?
So my background in this field's a little bit different than most people. So I've been in the space of technology, social, and digital for probably about 15 years now. And the background's different because I'm very much an experiential learner.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't really like to read about things or even just talk about it. I like to do it. Like that's how I learn. That's how I figure things out, and I really enjoy it. So I initially started off in film school wanting to learn the business side of film and produce movies. And then I just quickly realized they don't teach you anything about business in film school.
Right.
So I figured the best way to learn about business is start your own, and the most cost efficient way at time, and it still holds true today, is to start internet companies. And so I did that. I created a few internet companies while I was going to college just to learn and experiment. And then when I moved out to LA to pursue a career in film, it's when the entertainment industry started to reawaken to digital after the dot-com bust.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, I've leveraged that knowledge that I had accumulated in creating those internet companies to get my foot in the door, to forge projects and connections, and started off working for two movie studios. I started at the bottom, and in the first year, I worked my way up, and eventually, I managed digital divisions for those studios, overseeing the digital marketing strategy on films ranging from $15 to $100 million budgets, which then also spilled over to working directly with actors and directors and producers and screenwriters on how to further syndicate their brand online. And then from there and that experience, I just really realized that I wasn't cut out for the corporate structure. I was more of an entrepreneurial spirit. So I left working in the studio systems and started building technology platforms on my own and licensing them back to big media companies. So I had built platforms for Viacom, Vice, MTV, Yahoo, Paramount, and those partnerships, specifically the MTV partnerships, opened the doors to work with some really well-known athletes and celebrities and musicians. This is where I got introduced to Taylor Swift and her team, and built a platform for Rihanna through them, and ran those startups for quite some time, for a few years, and then decided to get into the paid media space and helped build and advise a small group of people that ultimately turned into one of the largest social paid optimization firms in the world. And what that means is we were optimizing advertising campaigns for Fortune 100 and 500 companies on YouTube, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, Snapchat, just leveraging their advertising platforms. And that was really an eye-opening experience for me, because we would see this inefficiency in marketing content at the highest levels. We would have a huge brand or corporation come to us with a piece of content that they would spend hundreds of thousands, in some cases millions of dollars, creating, and then they would say, well, we want to spend another $1 million or several $1 million promoting to a specific audience.
Mm-hmm.
And when you would ask them, well, how do you know that this piece of creative is going to work and resonate with the audience that you are sending it out to the risk of all this money? And 9 times out of 10, they didn't have the analytics or data to support those decisions. It was just a creative hunch. And yes,
Yeah.
sometimes it paid off, but a lot of times it didn't pay off. And you can't, at that level, sure, you can lose a bunch of times and not be impacted, but it's not a long-term strategy. And also for the rest of us that don't have a tremendous amount of money to invest, uh, there has to be a better way. And that's why I left working on that company and I started building my own set of testing methodologies and processes to really test content at scale, to really understand what content formats, themes, and stories resonate with certain audiences to get them to perform a specific action before you invest too far in any direction. And in doing that, I saw a lot of success in working with brands and corporations on that, and then had an idea of, okay, could this be used not to just generate awareness, engagement, and clicks and leads, but could this be used to generate followers at scale? And then I started working with some celebrities and professional athletes and journalists from there to test this hypothesis of whether or not it could be used to generate followers at scale. And it worked. It started, generating success, and it seeded another idea in my head. It's great that I worked with these huge corporations and celebrities, but what about people starting from scratch and people starting from zero? Could this everything I've been learning be applied to those people or those companies that don't have television exposure or mainstream media? And that's where I decided to again run an experiment because I'm an experiential learner to see what
Hmm.
was possible. And when thinking about who would be the perfect person to run the experiment on, I thought, why not myself? Because I wasn't a professional athlete, I was not in television or film, not a rock star, and that's where I set off on this journey to generate 1 million followers in 100 countries in 30 days, which then led to the book.
I'm such a big fan of the book 1 Million Followers, and I love how you talk about how you weren't Taylor Swift or Katie Couric or an MTV star, and just how you addressed the regular side of who you are and helped how you helped it grow your following. I think it's just a thoughtful and thought provoking book that looks at growing that following. How large is your audience today?
It is we're like 1.5 million on
Wow.
Facebook, we're a million on Instagram, and I'm not sure where we're at on LinkedIn. It's still growing, but I mean roughly like over 2.5 million followers.
Just incredibly impressive. So you write that you don't consider yourself an influencer today. And I had a conversation with a friend of mine who is a social media influencer earning a living. She's making a good living at it. And we started talking about me and my small following. I think that I jokingly, describe myself as a marketing influencer, but I probably meant that with influencer being in a very tiny font. So I joke about that. But she's looked at me more as an authority in the space because she looked at influencers differently, which most people always equate to, attractive women on Instagram posting a lot of selfies. But we know that influencers today are so much broader than that, especially in the B2B space. So I'm very curious, how do you define what an influencer is and what is not one? And furthermore, why don't you consider yourself an influencer with such a large audience?
Well, I think that the it just everybody has a different definition of influencers. I mean, it's definitely evolved over the years. I mean, I did the first ever influencer campaign on YouTube back in 2006
Mm-hmm.
before there was even a word for it.
Yeah.
And I think at one point influencer meant, somebody with a large audience that could uh, reach people in an impactful way to have influence over decisions or influence them around ideas or topics or subject matter. And I think that the definition of it, at least in my mind, has shifted over the years. One of the big hot trends over the past few years is micro influencers,
Absolutely.
and I think that to me it's somebody. I mean, generally how people use the term influencer, it means some type of digital star, a YouTube star, an Instagram star, or somebody that has accumulated a large following and is almost a celebrity, but a celebrity on the internet through just social channels. I think that that's typically how the word is uh, or the term is defined.
Hmm.
in most contexts of how people use it. I would say that you could look at it another perspective, especially with the the rise of micro influencers and the popularity of that. That anybody with an audience can have influence. It's just a matter of how you leverage that influence strategically for certain marketing and strategic growth objectives. So that's how I look at it. I don't really call myself an influencer. I think I'm more of an innovation and experiential learner, and I'm using social media and building followings more so to learn how things work so that I can share that information with other people
Yeah.
rather than just trying to turn myself into a celebrity or an influencer. I would say that my passion is really thought leadership, so I see myself as that. Sure, people can call me an influencer, but I don't approach social media as a traditional influencer. When I'm posting content or creating content, I'm doing it as more of an experiment than to produce content that a traditional influencer would do to engage their fan base and audiences in certain ways. Obviously, our objective is always to create the most engaging content and to be successful in that. But we're taking a more of a creative testing approach and an experiential learning approach to that.
I couldn't agree more. I think one of the, to your credit, I think, you don't see the word influence anywhere on the cover of your book. You're trying to dispel it as part of your own, nomenclature, if you will. But people, unfortunately, I think we judge influencers so much just by the number of followers. You actually help address what they need to actually do to build that following. So, one of the things you mentioned in the book, and I wish you'd kind of elaborate on a little bit, because it's something I've thought of, was how Hollywood was looking at the number of followers that actors and actresses would bring. This comes up a lot, especially when people speak at conferences. They probably go look and see that Brendan Kane has 2.5 million followers. So, conference leaders would get googly eyed thinking about how much of an influence you could have over that audience. But do you think we're getting to the point where people are judged too much on the number of followers?
I would say yes and no. I mean, definitely, you've got to look at it from multiple perspectives.
Yeah.
So, for example, just with the movie analogy and the events organizers, the reason that number is appealing to them is they feel like there's a built-in audience that can then lend to
Mm-hmm.
selling tickets or selling awareness or whatever that may be. So from a business and marketing perspective, that's why they're paying attention to that, because it's, to put on an event or to produce a movie, it's very time and resource intensive. It's a big investment, and what they want to do is they want to give themselves the best chances to win and be successful. So that's where ultimately looking at the follower numbers can play into that consideration. With that said, just because somebody has a lot of followers doesn't mean it's necessarily going to translate into a specific action. Just because somebody has a significant amount of followers doesn't mean that somebody's going to buy a movie ticket to see them. If the movie's
Exactly.
not good, if it's not appealing to that demographic, then it's not going to translate. Same thing with a conference. Like if you're hiring, like somebody hired me, I'm going to speak at a conference that's all about fitness expo. It's like a fitness expo where they have like trainers from around the world trying to uh, get better at marketing and growing their brands.
Sure.
So they're bringing me in not because I have a bunch of followers and they expect to sell tickets. They're bringing me in because from an education standpoint, I can provide a tremendous amount of value to their audience. But if they were bringing me in just to sell tickets, it wouldn't make sense because I'm not a fitness influencer and I don't talk about fitness, and it would be just really strange for that. And that's not really the audience that I've cultivated. Sure, I'm sure there's a lot of people in my that follow me and watch my content that do like to work out and things of that nature, but it's not going to translate into ticket sales.
Agreed.
And again, it's like the micro influencers as well have become extremely popular because it can work. I mean, on both spectrums, it can work or it cannot work. It's just being whether you're strategic about it. Do those large social following numbers mean something from a validation and credibility standpoint? Sure. but that doesn't necessarily mean it's going to translate to the specific goal of why you would engage with that influencer.
So your own feed, especially at least on Instagram, is not full of just, selfies of you, which is what we often see too much of, but you have a ton of great aspirational content, especially video out there. What's your strategy, if you will, from a high level, what's resonated best with helping you grow your own following?
Well, the focus right now is really video. In the beginning, it was more photo based
Yeah.
because it was just easier to pull off from a production and resource level. But now the focus is really on video. I built an internal creative team where we are really experimenting, testing, and learning and figuring out how to make things go viral. So that's a huge push for me and what I'm focused on. Like people automatically equate large following to an increase in engagement, and that correlative effect is not the case,
Yeah.
especially with the algorithms and the way the algorithms are designed. So the first part of what I did was figure out how to generate followers and get people to opt in at scale. And now that we have that, the big emphasis has been over the past 6 months, and it's going to be going forward is okay, now that we know how to generate followers at scale, how do we generate engagement at scale? How do we generate reach, awareness, shareability, all of that at scale to be able to maintain the followers that you grow at such a rapid rate and truly be able to take advantage of it and to be able to scale it. And from my perspective and experience, it's just content's everything. It's like the better you get at producing content, the faster you will grow, the more meaningful your audience will become, and most of the time, all of your KPIs will fall into place with just optimizing content and finding out what really resonates with the audience that you're trying to get to perform a specific action.
Yeah, I read where you were trying to keep those followers engaged, but has it been more difficult than you would have thought? I mean, obviously you perfected growing an audience quickly, but have you seen engagement to be more of a challenge than you expected or about what you expected or any insight there?
Yeah, it's definitely, I would say it's difficult. And I don't know that I had a clear expectation of it going in.
Yeah.
I would say maybe my expectation was that it would be a little bit easier than it is. But the fact of the matter is, there's just so much competition. There's so much
Oh, I know.
content out there. I mean, there's 60 billion messages sent on digital platforms each day. I don't know what percentage of that is social, but I'm sure a significant amount of that is. And people give algorithms a bad rap. They get mad at them, they get angry at them, and
Hmm.
frustrated. Which, yeah, we get frustrated, but you got to understand the purpose of it. Like the purpose of an algorithm is to make sure that each time you open up that app, whether it's Facebook, Instagram, LinkedIn, YouTube, that there's going to be engaging content there for you. Because if you open up that app and you start swiping through the feed and or scrolling up on the feed and the content's just not engaging and it's boring, then you're going to close the app. And if that keeps happening over and over again, you're going to stop using that app eventually, and that destroys the overall business that these companies have made. So with the amount of people that you're following on these platforms, and the amount of content they put out there, they have to prioritize. They have to get smart to make sure that they're delivering that highest quality of content to you each time you open up that app. And that's where people really struggle with social media is they are not playing to the algorithms. They're just playing to what they think creatively makes sense or what they creatively want to say. And then the algorithms give them limited reach. And if they keep producing the same type of content that doesn't generate that engagement, doesn't play to the algorithms, and eventually their account is going to get labeled as an account that doesn't produce engaging content. And that's where you see a lot of people amassing large audiences and then ultimately not reaching scale with the reach for each piece of content and the correlative engagement with it is because they're just not playing to that. So to me, that is it's one of the most difficult parts to figure out. But once you do figure it out, there's just so much scale. There's so much opportunity.
One of the things I wanted to talk to you about, another chapter in the book, was talking about strategic alliances. Talk about how those alliances can help someone scale quickly.
Well, one of the analogies that I always tell people is if you're just starting out or if you're trying to scale, don't create traffic from scratch. Go where the traffic is.
Yeah.
And the one story that I really like that kind of gives a good analogy of this concept is how YouTube was acquired, I think, for like 1.6 billion in less than like 2 years or 2.5 years. I don't know the exact figures, but it's something along those lines. And the reason that they grew so fast is they essentially harnessed all of MySpace's traffic.
Mm-hmm.
So at the time that YouTube launched, MySpace didn't have a video player, and YouTube created uh, one of the first embeddable video players. And what happened was they would just seed it out to people on MySpace, and they would take this video embeddable player either with their video or a video of their favorite music video or movie trailer, whatever it was, and they would embed it on their MySpace profile. And then when that person embedded that video player, all of their friends could see it. And then the friends were like, well, I want a video player too. Because MySpace at the time was a very customizable platform that really was around self expression.
Mm-hmm.
And when they saw that, there was a YouTube logo on that video player, and people would just click and they'd be directed back to YouTube to get their own. And that's literally how YouTube grew so fast. Is they went to the traffic source. MySpace didn't know about it. They eventually tried to cut them out, but there was a huge user backlash. And they went to where the traffic was and harnessed that. It was the same thing with Airbnb, where they started with Craigslist. And they went on Craigslist and found people that were looking to rent their homes, and they said, hey, you should check out Airbnb because it's a much safer place to rent.
Right.
And they would get people to go on Airbnb. And then what Airbnb would do is take those new links or those new profiles of people renting, and then they would go post it on Craigslist and drive the traffic back. So that's where, and those are examples of strategic alliances where the partner doesn't even really realize it's going on. There's other strategic alliances that you can do where people do know, like influencers is one of the biggest types of strategic alliances that you can use to promote your product, your service, or whatever it may be. But it's just really this concept, and I've built really a career off of this. Is where is your audience currently?
Mm-hmm.
Who is speaking to your audience? How can you tap into that person? How can you provide unique value to that person, that company, that platform, whatever it may be, to harness that to your advantage or benefit? Or in the YouTube and Airbnb cases, you can harness traffic sources that the company doesn't even realize. But that's where I see a lot of opportunity and scale for people that they often don't, or they often overlook it when they're trying to build their brand or their following.
So another one of my favorite chapters with growing that scale was chapter 7, talking about going global. And I preach often as well, just because my own background about targeting to audiences. But when you're talking about building a much larger following, it doesn't hurt to build out your profile in countries like India and China, where you've got 4 to 5 times bigger than population than what the U.S. has. What have you seen in that regards, and how it's helped you grow?
Well, first off, it has to make sense for the brand and the business. So
Absolutely.
if you're a local business or you're an e-commerce company that can only ship in certain states or countries, then obviously it's you've got to be strategic with the audience that you're targeting. But I come from a world in the movie industry, for example, 60 to 70% of box office is international versus domestic. You will
Mm-hmm.
see movies that literally are saved by international box office because they bomb here in the US. So, and that applies to a lot of entertainments, and it can apply to speakers, artists, musicians, actors, directors, anybody that really could benefit from having a global presence where it doesn't matter if your fan is in Indonesia, Africa, London, Canada, Mexico, wherever that may be, is having that larger brand exposure can drive real results. Just given another example is WhatsApp was acquired for $17
Exactly.
billion dollars.
Yeah.
And what their focus was is emerging markets, because they knew that those emerging markets needed communication tools, mobile communication tools, and was very underserved. And there was very little competition because few people really focus on those markets. They almost look down upon them. And that's why Facebook acquired them for so much money, is because Facebook already had a foothold in all of the countries that were tier one countries: U.S., Canada, U.K., different parts of Europe, and they needed to diversify their their audience and foothold into places that they had not gotten into, and they saw WhatsApp as a unique opportunity to do that. And you'll also see this with a lot of companies that have reached critical mass in the markets that we're pretty familiar with. Like you look at like a Coca-Cola, a Pepsi, a Nike or Adidas, even Apple, Tesla. They're all looking at markets like India, which right now there's 1.3 billion people in that country. They project that it may be the world's largest population in 5 years. So to them, that's where scale is. That's where growth opportunity is. And I see emerging markets as an opportunity for the next 2 or 3 years. There's very little competition. Only really the smartest and the biggest brands are focusing on that space. But people will catch on, and eventually it won't be as easy to really scale in those parts of the world that right now present a real growth opportunity.
Well, I mean, obviously, when you see where Facebook's putting a lot of their money, especially right now in India, I think that's uh, just perfectly makes sense with what you said. So, when I got this book, I wasn't necessarily reading this as a personal attempt to build out a million followers. So many people today are looking to build out their following for a lot of different reasons, whether it's a side hustle, social channel, something else they sell or do. But when you think about it from building a personal following, how do you think that helps people in their actual business roles as opposed to in lieu of when it's not a side hustle? I mean, how can this help someone, for example, that's working at a large company like IBM or Facebook or AT&T or GE or some other corporate job like that? Because that focus is a lot different.
It is, and I would just say there's different ways that you can grow personal brands. It doesn't, maybe you just focus on LinkedIn and you just create compelling content on LinkedIn and get brand exposure, which is very different than Facebook or Instagram or YouTube. And I would say that the way that I look at it is your brand is with you for the rest of your life. If you create a startup or you at a company and that startup or company fails or you get fired, then you leave that behind. That's not really an
Exactly.
asset that you can bring with you versus your personal brand you can. And even if you're somebody within a corporate structure like IBM, the more thought leadership that you put out there, the more opportunities that can come your way, whether that's promotions within or other companies trying to recruit you to come over. So I, and it's a long-term play. That it's not like traditional direct response marketing where you get that attribution right away. Like building a brand is a long-term strategy. And there was one guy that I was listening to that I think really nailed it on the head. This guy, his name's Ryan Sternhart. He's a big real estate person in New York. He's on one of those reality shows that I don't watch, but he's got a big YouTube and Instagram presence. And he says that, what I'm doing now is I'm communicating with an audience today that could potentially become my clients 3 to 5 years down the line. And that's the way that I look at it from a brand building perspective, is you can be, seeding content, building audience and connecting with people that you may not even realize they're listening or they're watching. And it may turn into an opportunity 30 days from now, 3 years from now, 10 years from now. You just don't know. But the more you're putting yourself out there, the more you're building your brand, the more exposure you're getting, the more opportunities are ultimately going to flow with you in the long run.
So at the time you wrote the book, Instagram had not made the changes that grabbed, international headlines with removing the like counts. But when you look at Instagram or any other channel, what excites you the most about any one particular channel? Is it Instagram? Is it LinkedIn? Is it Facebook? What excites you? And then where do you think the ones are that you tend to stay away from that maybe aren't great for developing a large following?
Well, I typically do not pay attention to a platform until it's really hit 600, 700 million users. especially newer platforms, because you could just burn yourself out focusing
Yeah,
on too many platforms. And I just feel like there's just so much growth potential, and the audience size is so big when you look at, the big four: LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook,
sure.
Instagram. And I always recommend that people start with a platform that they use the most. Like that's where I recommend people will start to create content or grow following, because it's something you've got to be entrenched in and really love learning and being a consumer of that product, of that content, to get successful at it. To me, all of the platforms are exciting in their own ways in terms of what the potential is, and each one has different potential and different purposes for specific ways to grow. For me, it's all about focus and tackling each one individually to learn how it works before you move on to the other ones.
You're not spending all your time on TikTok?
No, it's a. I mean, I've been following them ever since they were Musically when they first
Yeah,
launched.
yeah.
It's a great platform. It's not a platform that I'm particularly interested in. It skews much younger. It doesn't really have, and I haven't looked. It may have developed, but the last time I checked, it doesn't have a really robust advertising platform. And so it's to me, it's not that interesting. I don't know that it's. I don't see it really evolving past what it is today, but I could be proven wrong. But I focus on the other platforms because there's still so much scale and opportunity there.
Well, Brendan, you live in Beverly Hills, not too far from the water. I'd love to know, and a few Hollywood sharks. What's your favorite kind of shark and why?
I would say that I got a chance to swim with the whale sharks, and I think that was
Yes.
pretty amazing. I think great white sharks are really fascinating to me. They're scary, but at the same time, I think that they're amazing creatures. And yeah, and they, I've had a few run-ins with them in the water, but I haven't spent a great deal of time with them. But yeah, they're pretty fascinating as well.
Well, Brendan, it's that special time of the show. Are you ready for the five most interesting and important questions that you're going to be asked today?
Sure, let's go for it.
All right. Number one, Facebook or Instagram?
It depends. Facebook, I would say, for rapid growth and for traffic driving. Instagram is more valuable from a perspective, a brand perception perspective, in terms of like brand deals and things of that nature. So it depends on what you're achieving.
All right. Number two, we got a Taylor Swift question. Shake It Off, or we'll go old school Tay Tay with Teardrops on My Guitar.
I would say Shake It Off.
Okay. Number three, LA or Chicago?
Definitely LA.
Yeah. Number four, Chicago is a good town. Just wouldn't want to spend any more winters there. Number four, a Shazam question. You interviewed one, and there was a movie with the other. So Chris Barton, the co-founder of Shazam, the music identification service, or Zachary Levi, the star of the movie Shazam.
Well, I would say Chris Barton. I mean,
I would hope
Shazam, the
so.
platform, are more interesting to me than
The movie
than a
wasn't
movie
that
star.
great. Yeah. All right. Number five, and the most important question that you're going to be asked today is biscuits or cornbread?
Definitely cornbread, even though I don't eat it because I'm gluten free. But cornbread is so good.
Good man. So, Brendan, where can people find out more about you? I want everybody to go grab a copy of this book, 1 Million Followers. But where do you generally drive traffic for people to follow you? Because we need to get you past 2.5 million to at least 2.6 by the end of this show. I wish I
I
had that
would
kind of
say
following.
that for the book is in all major retail stores and it's on Amazon. We do have, if people are interested, if they go to book.1millionfollowers.com, and one is spelled out, we do have a free book offer where you can get the book for free. You just have to pay for shipping and handling. And we have add-ons to that where we go a bit more in depth with some additional options. And we also have, people are really looking to take the next level. We have a, a private group that people can join where we're teaching the latest strategies and breaking down everything that we're using and other people in our network. come and speak at it as well. So that's one way. They can email me directly, B as in boy, Kane, Kane, at brendanjkane.com. And Brendan is spelled Brendan. Or they can direct message me on Instagram at Brendan Kane.
Awesome. Brendan, thank you so much for being with us today on A Shark's Perspective.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So there was my conversation with Brendan Kane, the best-selling author of 1 Million Followers, and he's an innovation strategist who empowers brands to scale, expand, and accelerate their business and influence. Let's take a look at 3 key takeaways from my conversation with him. First, with content on social channels, such a great and simple reminder that we need to let data drive the decision-making process more than just our guts. It's so important because you can invest too much in the wrong direction, and it happens all the time, with people and with brands. If you're looking to grow your following with content, then you've still got to test to see what resonates and works, both for growing a following and later for keeping them engaged. Too often people put out brand babble, and sometimes even that air quote babble can work, but you've got to still look at the core of your content, how it's delivered, how it's packaged, when, where, what channel, etc. Test until you see what works, and then keep testing and refining. Second, I always love the discussion on what an influencer is today. It could be that you're labeled as an influencer, a thought leader, an authority figure, whatever. But traditional influencers we typically think of often in one way. And as Brendan said, anybody with an audience can have influence. It's just a matter of how you leverage that influence strategically for certain marketing and strategic growth objectives. He's building an audience to learn and to share knowledge, but he does it more of in an experimental way, to learn rather than just to engage an audience. Yet he's still able to grow and to maintain a following that has some amazing numbers. Third, one of the things I've been thinking about often is how does the average person or employee go about building that following while being a normal employee, if you will? What do you do with that following if you build out your brand? And how can it help you later in life? Well, jobs unfortunately come and go, but at least your following is portable, or at least should be, for a manner of speaking, and should travel with you. So use that to create other opportunities. Make yourself more attractive to companies, investors, consumers, whoever wants to recruit you, pay you for consulting, whatever. Most importantly, though, this is a long-term play. As Brendan reminded us, building a brand is a long-term strategy. Got a question? Send me an email to kenneth@asharksperspective.com. Thank you for the privilege of your time. I gotta go concentrate on building my followers now. I'm still working on that first million followers, or first million sharks anyway. So join us on the next episode of A Shark's Perspective.